Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michelle Clements from Hawes Corporation. Welcome to our Motion Canada Comprehensive Guide to ANSI Compliance for Eyewash and Drench Shower Safety. Today, Justin Dunn, our trainer from Hawes, is going to be doing our presentation, and also thanks to support from Nicole Dennison from our marketing team, as well as Joe Marks, my counterpart in Canada. So we know your time is limited, so we're going to launch this off, and we will take some questions at the end. So be sure to jot down any questions, and we can have a little bit of a conversation toward the end of our presentation. So Justin, the call is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I really appreciate your time and allowing me to speak and talk about ANSI a little bit. If you hear anything weird in the background, I'm one of those working remote, so I've got the most unpredictable creatures in my house, my son and my dog locked up. So, but if you hear anything crazy in the background, I apologize. I'm just gonna try to move on and ignore it. So to cover real quick, to give you an idea of what we're talking about today, we're covering the ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 standard. That covers emergency equipment. We're going to go into the significant requirements of the standard and talk a little bit about how to test for those requirements, which is something we added to this presentation a little while back because understanding the requirements is important, but knowing how to test for those requirements helps to make you more of a subject matter expert and be able to speak to, how to accomplish that compliance and test for it too, which is really important. After that, we're going to go into best practices for emergency equipment. Some of the things that we've learned and picked up as a manufacturer of emergency equipment since the 1950s. We'll do a quick Q&A. If you have any questions, we'll kind of open it up, or you can submit them in the chat and we'll try to get to them and make sure that we get everybody's questions answered. When it comes to ANSI and compliance and safety, I can really run my mouth, so I'll try to control myself and leave us enough time at the end for us to get through all those questions. And then last, we're going to go through a new products update. Since we have you here, we're going to cover some of the newest additions to our line and give you a little update as to what we got going over at Hawes. To start, ANSI in Canada. In the US, we have our boogeyman, OSHA, that regulates enforcement for ANSI. OSHA has a really simple little sentence they give us, and that's it for compliance. So what they do is they tell us to refer to ANSI, Z358.1, as the source for compliance with their own standard, 29 CFR 1910.151C. In Canada, OSHA isn't a regulatory body, right? So that's not an issue, but the ANSI standard is referenced in all provinces in one way or another. Some places a little more heavily, in some places it's still growing in popularity, and this is the world over. ANSI, unless a particular country or area has developed their own ANSI standard or version of it, they use ANSI and the Z358.1 standard. Saskatchewan and Atlantic provinces all state that the eyewash and shower units must comply to the most recent ANSI standard, currently 2014. Alberta, BC, Manitoba, Quebec reference ANSI to varying degrees. And then Ontario has no specific eyewash shower requirements, but they do state where a hazard exists that equipment must be provided, very similar to what our OSHA does for us here in the US. You got a hazard, you have to have emergency equipment, and then the Ministry of Labor deferred to the ANSI standard as the best practice for complying with that standard, which is really important. And again, that's the world over. The Z358.1 standard is really a very well thought out and put together standard, which is why so many people have adopted it. Really quickly, I wanted to touch on the eye injury rate in Canada. Nearly 700 every day. This is from 2017 safety data. And in the world we live in, I'd love to think that gets better over time, but you never know. The number of Canadian workers per day that sustain eye injuries is 700, which is, a really large amount of people. And in Canada, you have such a wide variety of industries. The oil and gas is really heavy, forestry, mining, chemical manufacturing, food processing, even the food processing is so important to have this type of equipment. The type of areas that you're likely to sustain injury from a chemical or hazardous substance is so wide and varied. Even your favorite restaurant in town should have an Eyewash in the kitchen. Lost time injuries based on area. The number of lost time injuries total 251,625. That is a large number of injuries. The injuries related to fatalities, 326. One is too big, but again, when left up to human error, you never know what could happen. And then the number of occupational disease-related fatalities, 625. A lot of these could be contributed directly to chemical exposure, hazardous substance exposure, and things like that. Some more facts that we found, and some of the hidden risks that we found across Canada. 873 million. It's the total cost on average per year for work-related injuries. 275 lost time claims and 438 disabling injury claims in the chemical industry alone. 698 claims from the laborers in processing, manufacturing, and utilities, which is very high. 1,300 eye injuries, 143 days lost due to chemicals, again, chemical splash, battery acid, all of those different things contributing to that. 246 days lost due to burns. And when we're talking about burns, the mortality rate skyrockets when you factor in the burns into the injuries. Ontario, the second highest rate behind Alberta for the number of injuries related fatalities with 76 total. And then 40 people under the age of 24, so our younger working class, are injured at work every day. 86,000 people in all injured at work in 2017. So some pretty scary statistics. Really speaks to why it's so important to have standards like this in place to help protect our working class and our people out there dealing with these hazardous substances. So what is the ANSI ISEA Z358.1-2014 standard? So the American National Standards Institute and the International Safety Equipment Association in conjunction, the ISEA being the source for the standard, they wrote the standard, ANSI distributes it. ANSI defines the emergency eye wash and shower design, location, temperature requirements for proper functionality and usage, right? So very important overall. The standard itself was first published in 1981. It's been revised in 1990, 1998, 2004, 2009, and 2014. It's our most recent version. There is no grandfather clause in the standard. So if somebody's asking you, well, I was completely compliant with the 2004 standards or 1998 standards during the time the equipment was installed, well, a grandfather clause only works in its inclusion into the standard. So in a standard, you'd have to include something that says, hey, if this was installed on this date and this was the version of the standard, it's completely compliant forever, or however you want to phrase it. That's not the case here. There's zero grandfather clause, and it's expected that you comply with the most recent version of the standard wherever you're at. The 2009 revision was one of the most important that we got and had some of the largest changes, most important changes that we needed. The temperature range for water delivery. Previously, it just said tepid, but tepid water is a lot of things to a lot of people. Simultaneous use, very important. I'll go over that and why it's so important. Eyewash testing requirements. And then in 2014, this was, a lot of these changes were really geared towards manufacturers of emergency equipment. Luckily, we've been doing this for so long, we were way ahead of the curve. We didn't have to change a thing. But it covered the design, manufacture, and installation of emergency showers, the equipment installation location, and adjusted measurements. Some manufacturers of emergency equipment were going away from what was normal, and can make this a dangerous process of putting emergency equipment in place. If you have different pieces of emergency equipment that activate and work differently on site, and your people, your workers get used to activating a certain piece of equipment one way, but they go to another and find out it's activated entirely different, then we have a problem, and may prolong the amount of time it takes for them to activate equipment. So let's get into the significant requirements and how to test for those requirements. So first and foremost, weekly and annual inspections are required. The weekly inspection is a lot more simple than a lot of people think. I get questions about this constantly. Almost on a weekly basis, I get a call or an email or somebody reaching out through the website that wants to know what's required of them. They think it's a complete annual test, a head-to-toe evaluation of the equipment, and the weekly test is very simple. All that needs to be done is the equipment needs to be activated. You have to ensure that there's water flow to the heads of the device, the shower, the Eyewash, wherever water comes out. If you have a shower, test it. If you have an Eyewash, test it. And we have to make sure that there's water flow. The only other requirement is that activation needs to be long enough to clear all the stagnant water out of the dead leg in the piping. So wherever the source of the water is to the equipment needs to be cleared out. Now, sometimes that's not very clear how long that dead leg is. It can be difficult to gauge how long that stretch is. So I always suggest at least 30 seconds if you're not entirely sure. And on a weekly basis, you could be pretty safe that you're not getting growth in the pipes. But the primary reason for this is to prevent things like Legionella and other growth in the pipes that could do further damage if you're in an emergency, right? Once you get to the hospital, now you're dealing with an infection of the lungs and things like that. One more thing on the weekly inspection. On portable equipment, non-plumbed equipment, activation isn't required. All that has to be done is the equipment has to be opened. If it's a wall-mounted tank, portable gravity-fed type of equipment, you have to open it up, make sure there's enough water in there to perform a full 15-minute test. It's meeting the manufacturer's requirement for how much water should be in there, and you're compliant. You're just ensuring there's enough water in the tank to perform the 15-minute flush. That's all. The annual inspection is that complete head-to-toe evaluation of the emergency equipment. It has to be done once a year. Everything that I'm about to be covered has to be done. The most difficult part of this requirement, and the reason why education is so important and making people understand that this is really valuable and has to be done, is that see what did I say? There's an alarm going off in the back. It'll turn off in like a second. But the evaluation, the 15-minute test is the most difficult to do here. There we go. Thank goodness. Okay, let's hope that doesn't happen again. I have a 130-pound Rottweiler in the house, and he's hard to control sometimes. So 15 minutes that's a lot of water to control and to handle. And it can be difficult to capture all of that water. There's not a lot of specialized tools out there to handle that and to control it and to direct it to a drain. Drains aren't a requirement in the ANSI standard. There's nothing that talks about drains. That's all local plumbing code. So we really need to make sure that a head-to-toe evaluation needs to be done and a full 15-minute flush of the equipment to ensure that it's capable of doing so. Moving on, some of the tools that we highly recommend and are a requirement for the weekly activation to make this as easy as possible would include the tape measure, an Eyewash gauge. An Eyewash gauge, ours is a model 9015, and it's based directly on the ANSI standard. They gave us the drawing, they showed us how to make it, and what it does is evaluate the equipment's ability to deliver flushing fluid to the eyes. You need a 5-gallon bucket with a 2-gallon water line marked, a shower sock and a pole, a thermometer, and an ANSI Z358.1 checklist to ensure that you're hitting everything that you need to hit. Very important. Moving on, the very first requirement other than testing that we need to talk about is that it needs to be accessible within 10 seconds or within 55 feet. There is a subsection to the ANSI at the very end. They tacked it on and included the measurement of 55 feet for us because 10 seconds is really hard to gauge for everybody. We all move and can travel 10 seconds at a different pace and different lengths, so it was hard to gauge. So they gave us a definite measurement of 55 feet from hazard to emergency equipment. Now, one of the questions I get is if you have squeeze bottles, the portable small bottles of flushing fluid, typically kept at the hazard, if I have those, can I extend that 55 feet out? And the answer is no. If you have those, it's usually a sign of a really healthy safety environment. The squeeze bottles are meant to treat your eyes immediately on your way to the emergency equipment. It's a way of us making sure that you, in any way, shape, and form, can save your eyesight. Some of the things that you're dealing with are especially dangerous, and the use of these bottles could really help to save and protect your eyesight. We suggest putting emergency equipment as close to the hazard as possible, but 55 feet is the maximum distance. To test, you just want to check the proximity of the hazard. Measure physically if you need to, if it seems like it's really close at that 55-foot limit. But we have to make sure it's within that range. It needs to be located on the same level as the hazard. You can't have stairs or a change in height in the flooring. Ramps are kind of controversial. It's okay to, in my opinion, it's perfectly fine to have a ramp that's an accessible route, but we can't have stairs, steps, or anything else in between the hazard and the equipment. So just make sure there's nothing in the way. And then it has to be free of obstructions, right? We don't need to make an obstacle course for somebody trying to get to the emergency equipment. We want it to be as quick and as easy as possible. So travel the path between the hazard, the equipment, and just make sure that there's nothing in the way. This could be tool carts, stuff like you see here in the photos. I mean, emergency equipment is a type of equipment that kind of goes in the corner. You got to test it on a weekly basis. A lot of people, unfortunately, forget about it. They don't test it. They pile junk around it like you see in the photos here, and it creates a difficult pathway to the emergency equipment for the victim. The area needs to be well lit, and the equipment needs to be easily identifiable with highly visible signage. So the victim needs to be able to see it and get to it as easily as possible, right? You already probably don't have very good use of your eyesight. You might have chemicals in your eyes, so we want it to be as highly visible as possible. So check for proper signage and adequate lighting for the area too. It needs to deliver flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes. So on that annual test is usually where this is done, but you have to run the piece of equipment for a full 15 minutes. We also suggest upon first installing a piece of equipment, running it for a full 15 minutes to ensure that it's capable of doing so. The outlets of the equipment need to be protected from airborne contaminants. You have to have dust covers in place. The potential for debris and dust, etc., to build up into the heads of the device, clog it, and cause flow rate issues is really serious. So on plumbed equipment, the cap there you see there on the right, the yellow cap, needs to be in place. It looks different for every piece of emergency equipment, but the dust cover has to be there. And on portable or self-contained tank type equipment, you just have to make sure that the stored flushing fluid is covered as well. The dust covers also have to be self-removing. You cannot activate the equipment and then remove the dust cover manually. The dust cover has to be removed automatically upon activation of the equipment. However that's done or achieved, ours is done with the flow rate. You hit that paddle, the flow rate will pop that cover right off and you're in business. But some operate differently. So just make sure it comes off all by itself, otherwise it's considered non-compliant. Oops, skipped ahead. It needs to go from off to on in 1 second or less, and it needs to remain on without the use of the operator's hands. This is kind of controversial. A lot of people get a different version of this stuck in their head. And that's that the equipment needs to be go from off to on much faster. But it needs to be, you just have to have water flow to the heads of the device in 1 second or less, and that's it. It has to remain on without the use of the operator's hands, and that's because self-closing valves used to be really popular and very common. Globe valves, etc., with a big spring on it that would slowly close or quickly close the second you let go of the handle. I can, rub my belly and pat my head at the same time, but I can't hold an eyewash open, activate a shower, open my eyes, and remove my clothing all at the same time in a piece of emergency equipment. So the valves on the piece of emergency equipment have to stay open indefinitely unless they are manually closed by the operator. Very important. So watch out for those spring-loaded valves and things like that. Those used to be very common, and we have to replace them. All of the equipment has a minimum GPM that it has to meet to stay compliant. All of these are bare minimums. Unfortunately, in the ANSI standard, we get a lot of minimums. We don't get a lot of maximums. So on all of these, the Eyewash, for example, has to deliver 0.4 gallons per minute. The eye face wash has to deliver 3 gallons per minute, and the drench shower has to deliver 20 gallons per minute. There's no maximum, unfortunately, and we at Haas specifically really think there should be. The overuse of water or plumbing too much to a piece of equipment can lead to some other really nasty side effects, such as injurious flows that I'll go over. The drench shower pumping out 30 gallons per minute while your skin is already compromised from a chemical splash or corrosive or something like that can be really damaging and have the opposite effect that's intended, and will be really difficult for the victim to want to stay in that equipment in that flushing fluid for a full 15 minutes. So it can make it even more dangerous. And we want to make sure that the victim has a comfortable experience, right? So they have to meet these minimums, and I'll show you how we do that too. So here's a good example of a flushing fluid flow rate it's gentle. It's using our Axion technology, our flow controls, to help control the amount of water that's coming out of there. And the requirement is that the equipment has to have a controlled flow of flushing fluid and at a velocity that's low enough that's non-injurious to the user. And I'll show you what that looks like. And to test that, just confirm that the flow rate from the shower, eyewash, and the pattern requirements are met. And I'll show you how to accomplish that. Remember the eyewash flow rate is 0.4 gallons per minute. The eye face wash flow rate is 3 gallons per minute. You can see on the left here what happens when you plumb too much water to a piece of emergency equipment, or when it doesn't have integrated flow controls into the equipment. You get what's called, or what I like to call, a brainwasher. This is going to hurt. Nobody's going to want to put their eyes in this. This is going to hurt badly to put your eyes directly in that flow. And then on the right side, you see the complete opposite. We don't have enough water. The heads of this device, this is an NCON. They use 8 gallons per minute per head. So you're looking at a 16 GPM requirement just for the eye face wash. So if you're not plumbing enough water to this thing, it's not going to perform correctly. We can retrofit this stuff. We can fix these really easily with our Axion technology and our retrofit kits, which is important. But when you have too little flow, you're choosing whichever eye is your favorite. You don't have enough flow there to wash both of them, unfortunately. This tool is what I mentioned earlier, a 9015. This is an eyewash gauge. This is for measuring the equipment's capabilities for washing your eyes out. It's based on average human anthropometrics, which is measurements of the human body, and is based on average human eye spacing. And the way that you use this is that you have to ensure that the flushing fluid covers the areas between the interior and the exterior of a gauge at some point less than 8 inches above the eyewash nozzle. Basically, the streams from the eyewash have to meet the eye circles on the gauge. You start at 8 inches and slowly lower the gauge. Like here, you can see we measure to 8 inches. We're starting with the gauge there and then slowly lowering it. And so long as the streams meet the eye circles, then we're considered compliant. This is a good view of it too. You can see that the 2 streams there in the middle, which are intended to be the eyewash, are hitting directly in the eye circles of the gauge. So we know that if a human were to use this, it's going to meet the streams are going to meet your eyes, right? So this is also telling us that because it's difficult to capture the water and from an eye wash or an eye face wash, we don't actually capture it and measure it to make sure that it's at 0.4 GPM or 3 GPM. We're assuming that if it's meeting gauge guidelines, that it is also meeting the GPM requirements for that piece of emergency equipment because it's usable. So that is how we were measuring the eye washes and the eye face washes. So it needs to be arranged so that the flushing fluid flow pattern is not less than 33 inches and no greater than 53 inches. This is one of the ways that we prevent injurious flow rates, like you saw before with that guardian head. Incredibly powerful water streams that are shooting 20 feet this way and 20 feet that way. That's going to hurt really badly. And one of the ways we help control that is this measurement right here. So this measurement is to the top of the flow rate, the water, not the head of the device. So the top of the water stream has to be within that range, 33 to 53 inches from the surface floor of the user, whatever they're standing on, right? This was previously a 45-inch measurement measured to the head of the device, which wasn't doing anybody any good. So it's actually the top of the water. We also have to ensure that the head of the device has a minimum distance of 6 inches from any obstruction. And that's just making sure that when we go to use the device, we're not going to hit our head on a nearby piping or device and further injure ourselves, that's all. So for the flow pattern, you're just going to use a tape measure, right? You're going to measure from the floor up to the top of the flow pattern to ensure it's within that 33 to 53 inches. The minimum distance for the heads of the device, you just want to measure from the outside of the head out, make sure that it's 6 inches away from anything and ensuring that we're not going to hit our heads. The shower, again, is 20 GPM. On the right, you can see a really good example of a low flow situation. We don't have enough water here. The eyewash is being starved. There's not enough, oh, actually it's not activated yet. I have a really good example later of it, I'll show you. Starvation is one of the most serious issues that we have with emergency equipment. And I'll explain here in a little bit. But the shower head is a 20 GPM. For combination units, during simultaneous use for a shower and eye wash, the minimum would be 20.4 GPM. And for a shower and eye face wash, you're looking at 23 gallons per minute. The flow rates for the shower head, this is where that kit comes into hand, right? This is a lot of water to control. We have to capture it. Sometimes we're in sensitive areas with sensitive equipment, drywall nearby, things like that we don't want to get wet. So the use of this kit is really important. We have our 5-gallon bucket with our 2-gallon water line marked like in the photo, our shower sock and pole, and the thermometer testing the temperature of the water is actually in the bottom of the bucket. So, and that's our first step. So throw the thermometer in the bottom of the bucket, place the shower sock around the shower head and funnel it into the bucket, activate the shower for 6 seconds, and check that the 2-gallon water level mark is met on the bucket. So what we're doing is we're taking 60 seconds and 20 gallons and dividing by 10. It's like checking your pulse, right? The nurse is supposed to do it for a full minute, but they really do it for 10 seconds or 20 seconds and they just do the math. So 6 seconds, 2 gallons equals 60 seconds and 20 gallons. That's what we're measuring. The shower flow pattern can be difficult to test, right? Because sometimes, again, we're in sensitive areas. We can't just fire off the shower and pump out 20 GPM anywhere we want. If the equipment's outside, or if there's a drain nearby, or if you're in one of those industrial settings where everything's wet and gross anyways, you can just do whatever you want, you can shoot off the shower. But in other situations, hospitals have them in the corridors, things like that, we can't just do that. So we're assuming if the shower is meeting its minimum GPM requirements and there is zero damage to the heads of the device, the shower head, then it is performing correctly and you're getting the correct flow pattern underneath that shower socket, and we can consider it compliant. Whenever possible, do it without the shower sock, a quick on off, just to make sure that we're getting a good flow pattern from the shower. The requirements are that the flow pattern be 20 inches wide at 60 inches above the surface floor of the user. And that's, again, just based on average human measurements. That's shoulder to shoulder width. So if you're standing directly up in the shower, kind of like this gentleman here on the right in that compliant example, that flow pattern would cover his entire body. And that's what we're looking for, right? Is full body decontamination with the shower. And then the flow pattern has to be 16 inches from any obstruction from the center of the column. And again, we're just making sure we're not wrestling with anything else. The flow pattern isn't obstructed and it's going to hit our body correctly. Watch out for those non-compliant flow rates and flow patterns too. If it's not using a centralized nozzle like our own showers, here you can see this. In this example, you can see the shower. It's using a centralized nozzle and it's spraying evenly across the body. In the previous slide, you can see that it's using the shower bell, which is something we consider a little more hazardous. This can create something called, or something I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that calls it this, but I call it the donut effect. It's using the shower bell and it's pushing the shower out and down the bell, which encircles your body rather than focusing it down on the center of your body and spreading it out evenly. So watch out for that too. That can be a really serious hazard and not something that's technically controlled by the ANSI standard. We're just looking for 20 inches wide. So use the tape measure, activate the equipment, make sure that it's 20 inches wide. And again, it's 60 inches above the floor. So measure up, measure the width, and we can ensure that this is compliant. The shower head itself, the outlet of the water more specifically, has to be 82 to 96 inches from the surface floor of the user. That's just making sure that if it's too high, the flow pattern is going to spread out too wide and may not flush our bodies correctly. And if it's below that 82 inches, it may be too narrow and not cover our entire body or be more injurious. So use a tape measure, measure from the floor to the outlet, make sure that it's within 82 to 96 inches. The pull rod on the equipment also has to meet a maximum height of 69 inches. It cannot go over that. Anywhere below that is technically compliant. And that's just because it's reasonable to think that the taller among us can reach any height pull rod, but the shorter amongst us have to be able to reach up and grab that pull rod. And if we put it too high, they're not going to be able to activate the equipment, right? So use the tape measure, measure to the bottom of the pull rod, make sure it's under 69 inches and we're compliant. I get a lot of questions about push flags for showers because it's not that uncommon. It's way more uncommon than a pull rod would be. But if there's a push flag that activates the shower under 69 inches, that's perfectly compliant too. There's nothing saying it has to be a pull rod or it has to be a push flag or anything like that. Just the activator. Combination units need to be capable of operating simultaneously and need to be positioned so that the components, the shower and the eye wash or eye face wash, can be used simultaneously by the same person. So this is one of the most dangerous non-compliance, performance-related issues that we run into with emergency equipment. Shower heads and eye washes and eye face washes, it's really important that we use flow controls in those to help prevent something called starvation. So a lot of emergency equipment out there that you'll find has no flow controls. The shower head pumps out 30 plus GPM, and when it's activated in conjunction with an eye wash or an eye face wash, the water is going to take the path of least resistance to the equipment, and that's usually the shower head that's pumping whatever it wants out of the head. And this will starve the eye wash or the eye face wash. And now you're forced into a really terrible situation. Do I want to save my skin, or do I want to save my eyes and my face? And we don't want to put people in that situation, right? So flow controls are incredibly important. We have to make sure that both are activated at the same time and functioning correctly at the same time. And then for whatever reason, the installer, the plumber, they get this equipment and they just decide to throw the instructions away immediately. We still find a lot of emergency equipment where the shower is facing one way or the eye wash and eye face wash is facing the other way, and they think it's intended for different situations, right? If you hurt your eyes, you can go over here. If you hurt your skin, you can go over here. But this equipment is intended to be used at the exact same time. So the shower has to be positioned directly over the eye wash or eye face wash. Shutoff valves in line to emergency equipment have to be locked open. This is a requirement that isn't very frequently spoken to, and we think it's really, really important. Shutoff valves that are easily accessible by employees can be really hazardous. Anybody could be walking by and just shut off the valve on their way by. Maintenance teams, if there's not a lotto device in place, could forget to turn the supply back on if they just finished some repairs and things like that. So we suggest lotto devices, lockout tagout devices, sorry, I don't mean to use acronyms, and make sure those are in place to lock these valves open. They're only supposed to be removed in the instance for maintenance purposes. The equipment has to deliver tepid flushing fluid. It has to be between 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius and 38 degrees Celsius. And this is going to ensure that the victim can tolerate the water. They're going to be comfortable. I mean, 60 degrees or 16 degrees is not a terribly comfortable temperature. Our household showers are like 104, 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's comfy. That's fine. If I took a 60 degree Fahrenheit shower, I'd be freezing. Unfortunately, we got that 60 degree measurement from an old naval test that was done. They dumped a bunch of Navy SEALs in freezing cold water, and we're like, are you hypothermic yet? And the reason this is so important is that at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, we have about an hour or so until we're hypothermic, right? So if we're hypothermic with everything else that's going on, potentially burns and things like that, our body is going to shock, and that's going to be really dangerous, especially if we're dealing with, if it's outdoors, if there's wind, we have even less time. And below 60 degrees at 50, we have even less time. We've got about 20 to 30 minutes before we're hypothermic. It depends on our body size and mass and how long we can tolerate that temperature. But even ophthalmologists say that having tepid water helps increase the chances that the victim can tolerate the 15-minute flush. We've heard horror stories at Haas of coworkers having to force their coworkers to stay in the equipment because it was way too cold or it was way too hot and interacting poorly with the burns on their skin and things like that. So really dangerous, and we want to make sure they're having a comfortable experience. So the temperature of the water, again, earlier I mentioned placing the thermometer in the bottom of the 5-gallon bucket when you're activating the shower. It's a perfect way to test the temperature of the water for the shower. For eye washes, for eye face washes, you'll want to just stick the thermometer in the flow of the water in the bowl, or like you see in the video, if you have even if you have a laser measuring device, those are really handy. But we want to capture the temperature of that water, and not always just the immediate water coming out of the equipment. I like to ask if I can run a piece of equipment for a couple minutes and then test the water sometimes. And that's just because I get that warm water that's in the walls and out of the system, and now I'm getting the actual temperature of the water, because that temperature has to be maintained for the full 15 minutes. And now I'm getting cold groundwater that's coming in. So tempering, mixing valves, instantaneous heaters, they're very important pieces of equipment now. Employees who might be exposed need to be instructed in the location and the proper use of the emergency equipment. I call this the no duh clause. Employees have to be trained on where the equipment is and how to activate it. And if you're doing something particularly dangerous, it's important that you know exactly how that emergency equipment activates and how to use it. So make sure employees are trained. We have to check for the need for freeze protection. Where the possibility of freezing conditions exist, the unit needs to be protected from freezing, or freeze protected equipment needs to be installed, right? So check your local weather patterns for sub-freezing temperatures and any process in your facility that might create a freezing environment, right? So if you're working in food manufacturing or even in some chemical manufacturing facilities, you come into contact with manufactured frozen environments. And it's important that if you have water lines that come anywhere near those, et cetera, that we're protecting the environment and the equipment in it from freezing. Unfortunately, a lot of the annual testing for emergency equipment is done like in peak time, right? In spring or summertime, they're like, oh yeah, we got 78-degree water coming out of this thing, it's perfect. But nobody tests in the middle of January or December for potential freezing, and it causes busted valves and some really dangerous situations where the equipment's freezing, somebody finally needs it, they go to activate it, and nothing comes out of the equipment, right? So make sure you're checking for freeze protection and the necessity for it. This consideration in the requirement is in Appendix B5. It's at the very bottom of the standard. And because they realized after the fact that this was a necessity, we had to have this consideration put in here. The type of equipment you see on the right is a booth, right? This particular one, this is our Haas integrated equipment. It's designed for freezing or incredibly hot environments, somewhere where temperature is a high concern, and we need to protect the victim from that environment. So, and the equipment, speaking of. But a single step into an enclosure where the equipment can be accessed is not considered to be an obstruction. Now, doors are considered to be an obstruction, and steps are considered to be an obstruction. I'm about to cover that on like the next slide. But we cannot manufacture this type of equipment, nobody can, flush to the ground. We have to have an enclosure. So they realized this, and they put in a consideration to allow for one single step into that enclosure. So this is a change in level. We talked about this really early, but it is not considered to be non-compliant. This is perfectly acceptable. Where you do not have an enclosure, you cannot have a change in level. Keep that in mind. Now I just spoke about doors. Now doors are considered to be an obstruction unless it meets certain criteria. So the door has to be non-locking. The doors have to open in the direction of the emergency equipment. And the hazard has to be non-corrosive. If it's corrosive at all, you cannot have doors in place. You have to have emergency equipment immediately accessible, as close as is safe to do so. And it has to be push bar or panic bar activated, which is really important, right? We don't want to have to worry about a doorknob or latch or anything like that. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna be freaking out if I get corrosive chemicals on me, and I'm gonna be sprinting to the nearest piece of emergency equipment. And if there are doors in place, there's a reason they call them crash bars and things like that. So you wanna push and open the door You don't want to have to worry about it locking. Every second counts. So this is really important, and unfortunately something that we run into a lot that's in place. And sometimes there's no way around having to have a piece of emergency equipment in the room and immediately outside the door. These are some recommended best practices that I talked about earlier that I wanted to cover with everybody. The first one is actually kind of a bragging point. This is a different ANSI standard, Z358.1, and what it does is covers hazardous color coding. Red meaning danger, stop. This is typically used for emergency stop bars, buttons on machinery. Yellow is a tripping, falling, or striking hazard. It's a cautionary color. Orange is a warning. Parts of machinery that could cut, crush, or otherwise injure. And then green, the color of a certain emergency equipment manufacturer whose webinar you might be attending right now, is the location of safety equipment. And unfortunately, a lot of our competitors, not wanting to be confused with Haas and etc., do not use green as their color coding for their emergency equipment, but we do. It's really important. We think it's important to maintain the ANSI Z358.1 color coding with our emergency equipment so that they can easily identify the location of safety first aid equipment. Going over the correct equipment for the hazard real quick, because this isn't really covered. This is highly based on the safety data sheets for whatever the substances that we're protecting people from, right? So under the first aid section of a safety data sheet, that's where we're going to find that, well, you need to wash your eyes, or you're gonna need to flush your skin, and it's gonna tell us how long we need to do that. The bare minimum is 15 minutes. Sometimes some hazards have a much higher number for that flushing fluid time based on how dangerous the chemical is. So really corrosive chemicals can require up to 30 minutes or an hour of flushing. And that's because we don't want first responders to get exposed to that substance too. Otherwise, now they're dealing with a hazard on their end and on your end, and it makes for an even worse situation. So eye washes, wood shavings, dust, airborne particulates, substances that we're just worried about. They're just going to damage your eyes, not your skin. Eye face washes are for minor incidents affecting only the eyes and face. Eye face washes are really industry standard now. Eye washes alone, with the exception of portable equipment, because we can't manufacture that tank to support an eye face wash. That's why they're plumbed. We just can't, that tank would have to be huge to accommodate 3 gallons per minute as opposed to the 0.4 gallons per minute. So for plumbed equipment, industry standard is really an eye face wash now, because especially when it's connected to a drench shower. If we have a shower in place, we're talking full body decontamination, and we're just gonna use 2 streams for our eyes. It doesn't make sense. We wanna wash our whole face and our eyes at the same time. Now, a drench shower is also known as a decontamination shower. And what it really is for, it's really rare to find these by themselves. They're usually in conjunction with an eye wash or an eye face wash, but they're intended for PPE decontamination, right? Hospitals use them a lot, and that's just because of biohazards that wouldn't damage your eyes and things like that, but you need to get them off your body immediately. And things like that. So you see them a lot in like ambulance bays and things like that. The combination unit is really the best possible piece of equipment for any and every situation. This is full body decontamination. You can't go wrong if you put a combination unit in place. This is for chemical exposure. The eyes, face, and body are all covered. Another thing really important to consider, water that's too hot or it's too cold. Remember, it can force the user out of the equipment way too soon. If it's too cold, remember we're potentially dealing with cold shock, possibly leading to cardiac arrest. The user could end the flushing before the recommended time because it's way too cold, right? and the user might not remove their clothing, which is really important. If it's too hot, again, our average residential shower, about 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 40.5 Celsius. Legionella bacteria growth thrives between 95 degrees and 150 degrees, 15 degrees Fahrenheit, which is unfortunately a range that overlaps the ANSI standard. So it's likely they might lower the temperature based on future revisions of the standard. So really, really important. We don't want it too high. It could also negatively affect or have negative effects with the whatever type of chemical they're exposed to. Remove your contacts. Don't rub your eyes. Make sure that you disrobe completely. You got to be in your birthday suit. This includes socks, shoes, leaving those items on. Depending on the area, you could be standing on gravel, you could be standing on grating, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It might hurt the soles of your feet and things like that. So people are sometimes reluctant to take those types of clothing off. But at the same time, the contaminants are running down your body and they could get trapped in your shoes and continue to damage you. Providing privacy curtains is a really important best practice for us. This is potentially one of the worst days of one of your coworkers' lives, and we want to make sure that their decency is protected, right? Do bump tests before high-risk tasks, making sure that they, understand how to activate the equipment. Be cautious while assisting so you don't contaminate yourself. Ensure the signage is the correct type of signage. Don't post an Eyewash sign if you have a combination unit there. Make sure it shows a shower and an Eyewash. We don't want to send the wrong signal to somebody who might need the equipment and then get there and find out it's the wrong type of equipment. And then locate other first aid equipment near the emergency shower or Eyewash, right? Make it an all-in-one safety center. Now that I'm finished with that, I wanted to talk real quick about my survey program. This is something I oversee directly. This is a service that we offer. Our reps are trained on how to do this. We've had a lot of success with this. And what it is a complimentary emergency shower and eye face wash survey. The offering includes 1 full day of inspections, an inspection report, an executive summary chart, recommendations on how to fix all the issues that we did find, a debriefing meeting or web conference with the customer to cover all of the issues that we found, walk them through the process, potentially get them a quote and things like that. And then, of course, restrictions do apply. If they have 2 pieces of a portable equipment, we'll probably send them an ANSI compliance checklist, and I'll walk it through them on the phone. There's no need to send somebody out there just for that. And we want to make sure that certain reps and things like that are within a reasonable distance of the site that they're going to inspect, right? On the right is kind of an overall executive summary of what our findings have been. This is based on the completion and evaluation of 1,000 emergency units. And what we have found is that only about 12% of emergency equipment is entirely compliant. I'd love to brag and say those were all green Haas equipment, but the fact of the matter is that emergency equipment gets ignored, doesn't matter what color it is, unfortunately. And there are very few places that take the maintenance of their emergency equipment really seriously. Non-compliant other, that little blue piece of the pie there, is really, it was missing a sign or something, dust cover was off, things like that. The big Pac-Man size portion of that pie is unfortunately performance-related issues. The combination unit was being starved, there wasn't enough water, there was way too much water and it was injurious, all of those types of things. That's nearly 80%. That means there's a 1 in 5 chance that you could run into a piece of emergency equipment that's working correctly, and that's a pretty scary statistic. So that's the emergency equipment. You can reach out to us through the website if you have somebody that's interested, or if you know somebody that could utilize this type of work. And I'll respond directly. A couple frequently asked questions I'll shoot through really quick. The first one was easy. We kind of covered that. Does ANSI apply in Canada? Yeah, ANSI applies the world over. It's not always required in black and white, but it is the foremost in compliance with local standards and with ensuring that equipment's going to work correctly and save lives. What is the required weekly test versus the annual test? Just remember that the weekly test is activation, water to the heads of the device, and we're clearing out the dead leg. That's all that's required. The annual test is head to toe. With the ANSI update, our existing eye face washes, showers, and drench stations also required to meet the current guidelines. Remember, there's no grandfather clause. No matter what, you have to comply with the most current revision of the standard. We don't reuse old versions of the standard. Does a door constitute an obstruction? I just went over that. You'd be surprised how often it's every single webinar I get somebody asking about doors, and it does constitute an obstruction unless it meets that certain criteria. Okay, remember, non-locking, push bar, non-corrosive, and it opens in the direction of the emergency equipment. And then our requirements for drains included in the standard. Maybe in the future, this is local plumbing code, and we think it's really important to include that drain to help protect your nearby assets. I mean, 240 plus gallons of water is going to be really, more than that, 340 maybe, is really hard to control and could do a lot of damage to your facility. So drains are really important, but it's not touched on in the standard. And now that we are done with that, I'd like to quickly touch on some new products, spotlight a few of them, and then we'll close out with a couple questions, and I'm sure Michelle will want to say thank you and bye. So a couple of the new products that we have at Haas that we thought were really pertinent and important to bring up to you was number one, most people are familiar with our retrofit capabilities with our Axion technology. You've kind of seen our Axion technology at work in this webinar a little bit, but it can fix most flow issues. It's really important. This AX15 here in the top left-hand corner is adding to that line of retrofit capabilities. The Bradley Halo is a shower and eye wash station that we didn't have retrofit capabilities for before, but we do now in this AX15 kit. We found it was still having flow control issues through our shower surveys, and we wanted to provide a way to fix those flow issues that they have. On the right there, this is a little bit of a change. Our previous model was an SP158 or 157B, and it was a scald protection bleed valve, brass. We just moved to a stainless steel scald protection bleed valve. It's a really important piece of equipment. Opens to bleed scalding hot water out of the equipment. If it's in direct sunlight, if it's near a high temperature area of your facility, then this will help to purge that water and until it normalizes, basically. The bottom left, we now have repair kits for all of our mixing valves. This is a really important one for us. Previously, we were doing specials and things like that to try to send repair kits out when they were needed for our mixing valves, which are mixing the hot and cold water for ANSI requirements. Right at about 80 degrees is kind of that sweet spot in there, in that temperature range. These are easy to manage repair kits for all of our mixing valves and was an important addition for us. Next to that, we have water hammer arrestor and piping kits now for our instantaneous heaters, our 9321, 9326, 9327, highly important for instantaneously meeting those temperature requirements for the emergency equipment and pumping out and mixing hot and cold water. And if you're familiar with water hammer, you know just how much damage it can do to plumbing if you don't have an arrestor kit in place. So these are standardized kits to put those water arresters and piping kits in place. We also recently revamped our 7501. This is a piece of equipment that's used the world over. We cannot stop manufacturing of this piece of emergency equipment. You can see the previous model on the left, the new model on the right. Some of the key features that we improved upon are the water fill line, lift here callouts for ease of portability, externally visible CSA certification callouts for compliance, and then a really secure lid to prevent leakage from the plastic lid that's up there on the top right-hand corner for better mobility and use on site. Because a lot of these go to construction sites and stuff like that, and previously the lid wasn't as tight as we wanted it. So it's really pretty secure now, and we're really happy with the way it turned out. And then you can see the new label there in the top right-hand corner. This is a ridiculously popular product. We run into these just everywhere, and it was really important. Another one that I don't think we touched on, we now have a electric water cooler for Haas. This one is so incredibly important. We've been talking nonstop about this. On the left here, you can see some of the models that we have. These are can be filtered or non-filtered. It's the 1200 series is the name of the equipment. Some of the features include a large internal clearance for easy installation, filter replacement, maintenance, and also retrofitting of our opponent's equipment. Given how much space is down there, we can accommodate their water drain and power. An automatic sleep mode for energy savings and prolongs the life, not having the chiller on full time. Hands-free bottle filler sensor, more important than ever. I think everybody would agree. A bottle saved counter, 100% water content flush to ensure that the fresh water that you have fresh water with every use. So we have a purge feature that's on there that's really important. We have a industry-leading 3,000-gallon NSF filter for lead, taste, odor, and harmful contaminants. I already kind of spoke about that, but the auto purge feature, it automatically kicks on every 24 hours, ensuring that we're flushing the line. We're not going to get Legionella or anything else built up in those lines, and you're getting pure, good-tasting water every single time. 100% lead-free waterways. We've been doing that forever, though, since the 1990s, way before it was required, too. It's designed to retrofit over incredibly quiet operation. Because these goes in waiting rooms, front office, just about anywhere, and sometimes that chiller can be incredibly loud. And then promotes the use of reusable bottles to reduce landfill waste, and which is an incredibly important message nowadays. So and aesthetically, I think it's such an incredible looking unit. We haven't found anybody that disagrees yet. So really important highlight for us. And then lastly, just our portable and faucet mounted emergency eyewash units. We want everybody to remember that how seriously we take this. These are cost-effective, practical solutions for locations where potable water might not, you might not have access to potable water, and that includes a wide variety of sites. The 7603 was an important addition for us. That's the tank pressurized, we call it the keg eyewash, but it's a 15-gallon capacity capable of flushing for a full 15 minutes, and a little bit over that to ensure that you're getting the correct height on the eyewash and it's not dying down before the allotted time, that 15 minutes. The 7620 is a faucet-mounted eyewash. We call it the iPod, and is easily retrofittable in instances where you need an eyewash, but you do need to save some money. The 7501 is 9-gallon capacity, gravity operated portable eyewash that supplies a continuous flow of water. We get a full 15 minutes out of it, plus a little bit extra, like I mentioned before, and that's just to ensure that you have a fully usable eyewash for that full 15 minutes, and then it starts to die down because water pressure is we're gonna lose a little bit because it's gravity fed, right? And then we have a 120 volt insulated blanket for the 7501 too. It's the 7501 BL, and this will keep the water compliant and tempered in temperatures down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit or -30 degrees Celsius. This can retrofit any of our 7501s, or we have a kit that will come with both of them, the 7501T. And that's it. I'm sorry I went just a little bit over. Again, I really appreciate everybody attending. This is all of our contact information here on the screen. I've got Michelle here. I'm sure she's going to want to say bye and thank you real quick. Michelle, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks so much, Justin. I just have a couple things to say, and then we'll just open it up for a couple quick questions. But if I were a motion sales rep, and I just sat through this presentation, there's some key takeaways here. So one, obviously we offer a free survey, Eyewash survey. So what that survey does is it gets you into your end user, and it's a value add program. We can make sure that they're compliant, and it's there's some other opportunities there. So not only can you give them a free survey and that important part to their facility, but you can get some sales out of it, right? So you can get maybe some Eyewash parts, maybe some new Eyewash or dren shower equipment, maybe a thermostatic mixing valve or a tempering system. In addition to stuff that Hawes doesn't sell, you can get a lockout takeout order or some sort of spill containment. So there's a lot that's involved in these surveys that you get to look for other opportunities in your customer's facility for not only Hawes products, but maybe some other manufacturer lines that you carry. So kind of keep that in mind. You know, in addition, electric water coolers. So, okay, Hawes can do the safety side, but we can also do the drinking fountains. And last but not least, we have just come out with a couple days ago a portable hand washing station. So you probably saw throughout Justin's webinar here our keg pressurized portable Eyewash unit. Well, we have that version with a hand washing. Today, with the coronavirus stuff going around, people are in need for more hand washing, and Hawes was able to come up with that concept for emergency needs in hand washing. So we didn't picture that in this webinar, but we can certainly get you some more information. I also want to thank Glenn Downs and our Defender sales agent team for also being on the call today and being out there, the ones in Canada doing the surveys and kind of being at the front line with you. So thanks so much for your time on this. Does anybody have any questions?
Hey, Michelle, it's Nicole. I just wanted to add one quick point. I just posted a quick chat to everybody, but I wanted to let everyone know that we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with the resources from this presentation. Lots of valuable information, and we want to make sure that you have the resources after to continue this conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate that. All right. Well, it doesn't look like anybody else has any questions. I know we covered this in great detail, and please reach out to us if you have anything else you need, and Nicole will be sending out some follow-up. Thanks so much, everybody. Stay safe out there. We appreciate you.
Thank you.